Hey, everyone. I never thought I'd be posting here, but I really don't know where else to turn right now. My name's Eric, and my wife, Amanda, and I have been married for 7 years. For the most part, I thought we had a solid marriage. We've had our ups and downs like anyone, but recently, things have started to feel off. It all started a few months ago when Amanda started working later and later. She told me she was working on a big project at her marketing firm, and I didn't think much of it at first. But then there were a few things that just didn't sit right with me. She'd come home, sometimes around midnight, but she never seemed tired. In fact, she was full of energy, almost too happy, too cheerful after supposedly pulling these long hours. I chalked it up to stress, but I think I was trying to convince myself of that. Little things started piling up. She became secretive about her phone, always turning the screen away when I walked by. Our intimate life, which used to be great, started to fizzle out. She'd tell me she was too tired or not in the mood, but then she'd go out with her friends and come back looking refreshed. I tried not to jump to conclusions. I didn't want to be that guy, the paranoid husband who assumes the worst. But when you live with someone for years, you pick up on subtle changes, and lately, it felt like she wasn't really there anymore. I decided I needed to find out what was really going on. That's when everything started to unravel. A couple of weeks ago, I came home early from work. I hadn't planned to. Our team had finished up a project ahead of schedule, and my boss decided to give us the rest of the afternoon off. I thought about texting Amanda, but then I figured I'd surprise her. We hadn't had much time together lately, and maybe we could go out for a late lunch or just hang out like we used to. When I pulled into the driveway, her car was already there. I figured she was either working from home or maybe had taken the day off. The house was quiet as I stepped inside, and I called out her name, expecting her to be in the kitchen or maybe watching TV in the living room. But there was no answer. I checked around, but everything was empty. A little strange, but I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe she was taking a nap upstairs, I thought. When I got to the bedroom, I noticed something unusual right away. Her phone was lying on the nightstand, and it wasn't locked. This was odd because Amanda was always careful with her phone. She had a habit of locking it the moment she set it down, almost like she was paranoid about anyone seeing it. I stood there for a second, staring at it, my mind racing with whether or not I should look. I hesitated. I wanted to trust her, and I knew snooping wasn't the answer. But there was this nagging feeling in my gut that wouldn't go away, that something wasn't right. Against my better judgment, I picked up the phone. My hands were shaking a bit as I unlocked the screen. I figured maybe I'd just look at her texts, reassure myself that everything was fine and move on. But it wasn't fine. The first thing I saw was a message thread with someone named Brad. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't know any Brad, at least not anyone Amanda had ever mentioned. The messages looked innocent at first. Small talk, jokes, stuff you'd send to a friend. But as I scrolled further back, the text changed. They started talking about how much fun they'd had the other night, and how they couldn't wait to see each other again. My stomach tightened as I realized this wasn't just casual conversation. Then I saw the pictures. I wish I hadn't. They were the kind of photos you only send to someone you're intimate with. My entire body went cold as I stood there, staring at the screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. She was cheating on me. My wife, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, was having an affair right under my nose. Before I could even process the shock, I heard the front door open. Amanda was home, and I was standing there with her phone in my hands, knowing everything. I panicked. I quickly put her phone back on the nightstand, trying to compose myself. My mind was racing, and my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. What was I supposed to do? Confront her right then and there? Pretend I didn't know and wait for a better moment? Amanda called out my name, sounding surprised but cheerful, like everything was fine, like she wasn't secretly meeting up with someone behind my back. I felt this wave of anger, betrayal, and confusion hit me all at once, but I swallowed it down and forced myself to act normal. "I'm upstairs," I called back, trying to keep my voice steady. She came into the bedroom a moment later, smiling when she saw me. "You're home early. What a surprise." I tried to smile back, but I must have looked off because she paused and tilted her head. "Everything okay?" I couldn't hold it in. It just burst out of me before I could stop it. "Who's Brad?" Her face changed immediately. It was like watching someone's mask slip off. She blinked a few times, her smile fading as she struggled to compose herself. "Brad," she repeated, trying to sound casual, but I could hear the nervousness in her voice. "Yeah," I said, my voice shaking now. "The guy you've been texting, the one you've been meeting up with." For a second, Amanda just stood there, her mouth slightly open, like she couldn't believe what I was saying. Then she started laughing, a short, nervous laugh that felt completely out of place. "Oh my God, Eric, are you seriously snooping through my phone now? You sound ridiculous." But I wasn't laughing. "I saw the texts, Amanda. I saw everything." She stopped laughing, and her face went cold. "You went through my phone? How dare you invade my privacy like that?" Her anger caught me off guard. Here I was standing in front of her, knowing she'd been cheating on me. And instead of apologizing or explaining, she was flipping the whole thing on me. Like I was the one in the wrong. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You've been sleeping with another man, and you're mad at me for looking at your phone?" Amanda crossed her arms, narrowing her eyes at me. "I can't believe you'd stoop this low. Brad is just a friend, okay? You're blowing this whole thing way out of proportion." I stared at her, trying to process how easily she was lying to my face. Even with all the evidence, she was still playing innocent. "Just a friend? You send those kinds of pictures to all your friends, then?" Her face turned red, and she looked away for a moment, clearly caught in her lie. But she didn't back down. "You don't understand. He's going through a rough time, and I was just helping him out." Nothing happened. I felt sick. How many times had she lied to me like this? How many more excuses did she have lined up? My mind was spinning, and I didn't know what to believe anymore. I wanted to scream at her, to make her admit everything. But I also felt like I was sinking, like my whole world was crumbling around me. "I don't even know who you are anymore," I muttered. Amanda's expression softened for a second, like she was going to say something. But then she just shrugged. "I don't know what you want me to say, Eric. You've clearly already made up your mind." I stood there, stunned. The woman I'd spent the last 7 years of my life with, who I thought I knew better than anyone, was looking at me like she didn't care. Like everything we'd built together meant nothing. I felt the weight of it all hit me at once: anger, sadness, confusion. I wanted to lash out, to say something that would make her realize how much she was hurting me. But all I could do was stand there in disbelief. "How can you be so calm about this?" I finally managed to ask, my voice shaking. "You've been lying to me, cheating on me, and now you're acting like I'm the bad guy for finding out?" She rolled her eyes, crossing her arms defensively. "Oh, come on, Eric. It's not like our marriage has been perfect. You've barely been around lately, always working late, always tired. What did you expect? I needed someone to talk to, someone who actually listens to me." Her words stung, but they didn't make sense. I had been working a lot, but it was for us, for our future. I'd been pushing myself to make sure we could afford the life we always talked about, but now it felt like none of that mattered to her. I tried to stay calm, but I could feel the anger bubbling up again. "So, this is my fault? You're blaming me for your affair?" Amanda sighed, like she was bored of the conversation already. "I'm not blaming anyone. I'm just saying things haven't been great between us for a while, and maybe you didn't notice. But I did." I couldn't believe how casual she was being, like what she'd done was no big deal. I thought back to all those nights she'd come home late, smelling of a perfume I didn't recognize, telling me she was just with the girls or working late. I'd trusted her completely, never once questioning her excuses. And now it felt like that trust had been thrown back in my face, shattered into pieces. "I noticed," I said quietly, "but I didn't think you'd go behind my back like this. I thought we'd work through it. You didn't even give me a chance." For the first time, something shifted in her expression. She looked at me for a moment, and I saw a flicker of guilt, but it was gone just as quickly as it came. "Look, Eric," she said, her tone softer now, "I didn't mean for this to happen. Things just got complicated. It's not like I planned it. That was supposed to make me feel better? That it was just some mistake, a complication?" I couldn't wrap my head around how someone could be so careless with someone else's heart. "I gave you everything," I whispered, feeling tears burn the back of my eyes. "I trusted you." For a second, it looked like she was going to say something, maybe even apologize, but she just stood there, arms crossed, as if she didn't know how to respond. The silence between us was suffocating. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could feel was this overwhelming sense of betrayal, like the ground beneath me had disappeared, and I was falling with no way to stop. The silence between us stretched on, heavy and unbearable. Amanda wouldn't even look at me now. She just stood there, arms crossed, staring at the floor like we were talking about something trivial. I couldn't believe it. It was as if the last 7 years, everything we'd built together, meant nothing to her. I felt like a stranger in my own life. I tried to find the right words, to get her to understand how much she was hurting me. But nothing seemed enough. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my hands were shaking. "Amanda," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper, "I thought we were partners. I thought we were in this together. How could you just throw that away?" She glanced up at me, her eyes cold and distant. "It wasn't like that," she said, sighing. "You don't understand how lonely I've been, Eric. You've been so focused on work, on everything else. I was here, alone, feeling like I didn't even matter anymore." I was floored. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Alone?" I said incredulously. "You think you've been alone? I've been working my ass off to make sure we had everything we ever wanted. And this is how you repay me? By running off with some guy behind my back?" Her face hardened, and she took a step forward. "You weren't here, Eric. You were always somewhere else. Your job, your friends, anything but me. Don't act like you were some perfect husband, because you weren't." I felt my jaw clench. I couldn't believe she was flipping this on me. "So, instead of talking to me, instead of telling me how you felt, you decided to cheat? That's your solution?" She threw her hands up in frustration. "I tried talking to you, but you never listened. You were always too tired, too distracted. I needed someone who actually paid attention to me." I stared at her, speechless. Was this really happening? Was this the same woman I'd built a life with, who I thought I knew inside and out? Every word out of her mouth felt like another knife to the chest. I couldn't understand how she could be so cold, so dismissive of everything we'd been through together. "What about us, Amanda?" I asked, my voice cracking. "What about the promises we made, the life we were building? Was any of that real to you?" For a moment, just a brief moment, I saw a flicker of something, regret, maybe, or guilt, but then it was gone. She shook her head. "I don't know, Eric. Things changed. People change." That was it. That was the moment I realized she wasn't going to fight for us. She wasn't going to take responsibility for what she'd done. To her, this was just something that happened, something she could explain away with a few careless words. And I realized I couldn't keep standing there, begging for answers that she clearly wasn't willing to give. The pain in my chest was unbearable, like someone was squeezing my heart, but I knew I had to make a decision. I stood there, feeling like the weight of the world was pressing down on me. Amanda's words were echoing in my head. People change? It was so simple for her, so easy to say, as if it excused everything. I kept hoping for some sign that she regretted what she'd done, that she wanted to fix this, but all I saw was indifference. And in that moment I knew I couldn't stay with someone who didn't value what we had. I couldn't keep living with this gnawing feeling of betrayal, of being second place to some guy I didn't even know. Amanda had already made her choice, even if she wouldn't admit it outright. The anger that had been simmering inside me started to fade, replaced by a crushing sadness. This was the woman I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with, and now I was realizing that future wasn't going to happen. It was like watching a dream fall apart piece by piece, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. "I can't do this anymore," I said quietly, my voice barely steady. "I can't live with someone who lies to me, cheats on me, and doesn't even care enough to try to make things right." Amanda looked at me, her expression unreadable. For a moment, she didn't say anything, and I wondered if she'd finally break down, if she'd finally apologize. But instead, she just shrugged. "Maybe this is for the best then," she said almost casually. "We've both been unhappy for a while." Her words hit me like a punch in the gut. I had hoped, even after all this, that maybe, just maybe, she'd fight for us. But that wasn't going to happen. She was done, and I couldn't change that. A part of me wanted to scream, to tell her how much she was hurting me. But what would be the point? She'd already moved on emotionally, if not physically. "I'll pack some things and stay at a friend's place tonight," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We can talk about the details later." Amanda nodded, not even looking upset. "Yeah, that's probably a good idea. I think we both need some space." That was it. 7 years of marriage, reduced to a casual agreement to take some space. I felt numb as I turned and walked out of the room, heading to pack a bag. As I did, I couldn't help but wonder how we'd ended up here. How had I missed the signs? Or had she just hidden them so well? By the time I finished packing, I felt like a robot, just going through the motions. I grabbed my keys, gave one last look at the house we'd made a home, and walked out the door, not sure when, or if, I'd ever come back. The drive to my friend Matt's place was a blur. I don't even remember most of it, just that sinking feeling in my chest and the overwhelming silence. It was strange how quiet the world felt, even though everything inside me was screaming. Matt didn't know what was going on yet. We hadn't talked in a couple of weeks, but I knew he'd understand if I showed up out of the blue. When I knocked on his door, it was already late, probably around 10 p.m. He opened the door, took one look at me, and knew something was wrong. "Eric? Man, you okay?" he asked, his brow furrowing with concern. I tried to smile, but I couldn't. "Not really," I admitted, my voice barely holding together. "Can I crash here for a bit?" "Of course, man. Come in," Matt said, stepping aside to let me in. He didn't push for details, not yet, and I was grateful for that. I wasn't sure I was ready to explain everything. We sat down in the living room, and he handed me a beer without a word. For a while, we just sat there in silence, the weight of what I was going through making it hard to speak. Finally, Matt broke the silence. "You want to talk about it?" he asked, his voice gentle. I sighed, rubbing my face with my hands. I felt exhausted, drained in every possible way. "Amanda's been cheating on me," I said, the words feeling heavy as they left my mouth. Matt's eyes widened. "What? Are you serious?" "Amanda?" He sounded just as shocked as I had been when I first found out. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I found texts on her phone. Pictures, too. She's been with some guy named Bradford. I don't even know how long." Matt shook his head, looking as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Man, I'm so sorry. That's messed up. What did she say when you confronted her?" I laughed bitterly. "She flipped it on me, said I wasn't around enough, that she felt lonely. Like it was my fault." Matt leaned back in his chair, letting out a low whistle. "Wow, that's unbelievable. I don't even know what to say, man. You don't deserve that." I nodded, but I still felt hollow. "I don't even know what to do now. I told her I'd stay here for a while, give us some space. But it feels like it's already over." Matt nodded slowly, his face full of sympathy. "Maybe it is, man. But you don't have to make any decisions tonight. Just take it one day at a time. You can crash here as long as you need. We'll figure this out." I nodded, grateful for his support, but deep down I knew he was right. Something in me had already shifted. This wasn't something we could come back from. As I sat there, staring blankly at the beer in my hand, I realized I was no longer angry. I was just sad. Sad that the life I thought I had was gone. Sad that the woman I loved had turned into someone I didn't even recognize. And most of all, sad that no matter how hard I had tried, it wasn't enough. The next morning, reality started to hit me hard. Waking up on Matt's couch, surrounded by the unfamiliar. It was like the past 24 hours had been a bad dream. But then it all came flooding back. The texts, the confrontation, Amanda's cold indifference. My heart felt heavy as I sat up and tried to make sense of everything. Matt walked in, coffee in hand, and gave me a sympathetic nod. "Rough night, huh?" "Yeah," I said, taking the coffee he handed me. I still can't believe it. It's like everything I thought I knew just shattered. He sat down across from me, leaning forward. "I get it. But look, you don't have to make any big decisions right now. You've been through hell, and it's going to take some time to figure things out." I knew he was right, but it didn't make the pain any easier to deal with. I kept thinking about how quickly everything had fallen apart. How Amanda had looked me in the eye and lied, even when she knew I'd found out the truth. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I'd been living in some kind of illusion. Maybe I'd been ignoring the signs for months, trying to convince myself that we were fine when, in reality, we weren't. But how was I supposed to let go of 7 years just like that? "I keep thinking about how we used to be," I admitted, staring down into my coffee. "We were happy once, weren't we? Or was that just me?" Matt sighed. "No, man. You guys were happy for sure. But people change, things happen. Sometimes you can't see it coming until it's too late." I nodded, but it didn't make me feel any better. Amanda had changed, sure, but I'd stayed the same. I'd been trying, working hard to make sure we had a good life, a good future. And she had just thrown it all away. "I don't even know where to go from here," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Do I fight for the marriage? Do I just walk away?" Matt leaned back, considering his words carefully. "That's something only you can decide, Eric. But from what you've told me, it sounds like Amanda's already made her choice. You don't deserve to be treated like this. You deserve someone who'll actually fight for you." His words hit me hard. Deep down, I knew he was right. Amanda hadn't just cheated, she'd lied, manipulated, and then blamed me for her actions. She wasn't the woman I thought she was, and no matter how much I loved her, I couldn't ignore what she'd done. "I guess I need to face that," I muttered. "She's not going to change, is she?" Matt shook his head gently. "Doesn't seem like it, man." I sat there for a long time, letting the truth settle in. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the realization that the woman I loved wasn't who I thought she was anymore. I wasn't sure I could live with that, and the more I thought about it, the more the idea of walking away seemed like the only option. After a couple of days at Matt's, I felt a little more grounded, though nowhere near okay. I had time to reflect, but I still couldn't decide what my next move would be. I hadn't heard much from Amanda since I left, and I was fine with that. She texted me once, asking if I'd picked up the mail, but nothing about us or what happened. The silence was deafening. On the third day, I decided to stop by the house. I wasn't planning anything dramatic, just grab some more clothes, maybe a few things I needed, and get out. I didn't want to see her, and I wasn't sure if I could handle being in that house, in our home, knowing what had happened. When I pulled up to the driveway, Amanda's car wasn't there, which was a relief. I let myself in, the quietness of the place hitting me like a wave. Everything felt different, as if the walls themselves were holding the weight of the lies. I walked through the living room, staring at the familiar furniture, the framed pictures on the wall. Everything looked the same, yet nothing felt right anymore. As I made my way upstairs to the bedroom, I noticed something strange. A small envelope was sitting on the kitchen counter. It hadn't been there the last time I was in the house, and it was clearly addressed to me. My name was scrawled across the front in Amanda's handwriting. My heart sank a little, but I grabbed it and took it upstairs, sitting on the edge of the bed. For a moment, I just stared at it, wondering if I was ready to read whatever she had to say. I couldn't imagine what excuse she could possibly offer now, but I ripped it open anyway. Inside was a handwritten note. It wasn't long, just a few lines, but what I read made my stomach turn. "Eric, I'm sorry about how things ended. I never meant for any of this to happen, but I've been confused for a long time. Brad isn't who you think he is. He's not just some random guy. I've been seeing him for a few years now, and I never had the courage to tell you. But there's something more you need to know. He's moving in with me. I didn't want to say it to your face because I knew how much it would hurt you. But I can't hide it anymore. We've decided this is the best way forward. Please don't hate me for this. I really am sorry. Amanda. I sat there, staring at the note, trying to make sense of the words. A few years? They'd been together for years? My chest tightened, and I felt a wave of nausea. How could I have been so blind? How had I missed something this big, this huge? All those late nights, all those times she said she was working late or going out with the girls, it had all been lies. She had been living this double life, and I had been completely oblivious. And now Brad was moving in? Into our home? I threw the letter onto the bed and stood up, pacing the room. My mind was racing, anger boiling up inside me. Not only had she cheated, but she'd been lying for years. She had been planning this, bit by bit, until she was ready to move him into my life, my house, as if I never existed. I couldn't breathe. It felt like the walls were closing in around me. I rushed downstairs, needing air, needing space to think. When I stepped out into the driveway, I realized just how much my world had been flipped upside down. Amanda wasn't just breaking my heart. She was erasing me from her life, and she wasn't even bothering to hide it anymore. I stood there for a long time, trying to figure out what to do next. There was no going back now. This wasn't just some mistake, some affair she could apologize for. This was a full-blown betrayal, and she was moving forward without a second thought about what it meant for me. Suddenly, I wasn't sad anymore. The sadness that had weighed me down for days started to evaporate, replaced by a cold, steely resolve. This was the end of our marriage. There was no fixing this. And for the first time since I found out about the affair, I felt like I knew exactly what I needed to do. After reading that letter, I knew I couldn't just sit around and let things happen to me. I wasn't going to be a bystander in my own life anymore. I wasn't going to let Amanda waltz through our marriage, shattering everything we built together, and then replacing me with Brad as if I were some temporary placeholder. She had made her move. Now it was time for me to make mine. I drove straight from the house to my lawyer's office. I didn't care that I hadn't even taken the clothes I came for. The only thing on my mind was getting ahead of whatever she had planned next. I knew Amanda well enough to understand that if she was bold enough to move this guy in without a word to me, she was likely already setting up her next steps. Sitting in the waiting area, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. This was what needed to be done. I needed to protect myself, my finances, and any future I still had left. The marriage was dead, and I was finally ready to face that truth. After what felt like hours, the lawyer called me in. I'd never been in this kind of situation before, so I didn't know exactly what to say, but I laid it all out for him. The affair, the lies, the letter, everything. He listened quietly, occasionally scribbling notes, and then leaned back in his chair. Eric, understand this is hard, but I want to commend you for coming in right away. A lot of people in your situation would have waited too long, hoping for things to get better. I nodded, but I still felt like I was living someone else's life. This wasn't supposed to happen to me. We weren't supposed to end up like this. So what's next? I asked, feeling the weight of the decision settle in my chest. Well, first, I'll file for divorce on your behalf, the lawyer said. Given the circumstances, we can file on grounds of adultery, which might help you with some of the division of assets, depending on the judge. But since there aren't any kids involved, that should make things a bit smoother. Hearing him lay it out like that, so matter-of-fact, was like a punch to the gut. Divorce. I knew it was the only option, but the word still stung. This was it. The end of our marriage officially. I also recommend you start gathering any financial documents you can, he continued. Bank statements, any joint accounts, mortgage documents, all of it. We'll need to get a full picture of your shared assets so we can make sure you're protected. I nodded, taking it all in. This wasn't going to be easy, but at least I had a plan now. I wasn't going to let Amanda and Brad walk all over me. I wasn't going to be the victim anymore. When the meeting was over, I shook the lawyer's hand, feeling a sense of resolve I hadn't had in days. I walked out of the office into the crisp air, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I had some control over my life again. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As I got back in my car, I glanced at my phone. No messages from Amanda. No apology. No explanation. Nothing. And maybe that was for the best. Maybe it was time to let go of the idea that she was going to wake up one day and regret what she'd done. I took a deep breath, started the engine, and drove away. There was still a long road ahead, but at least I was moving forward. The next few days were a whirlwind of paperwork, phone calls, and emotional ups and downs. I spent hours digging through bank statements, mortgage documents, and any shared accounts Amanda and I had. It felt strange, like I was preparing for a battle I never thought I'd have to fight. I'd been avoiding Amanda as much as possible, but one afternoon my phone buzzed. It was her. For a moment, I considered not answering, but something inside me told me I needed to hear what she had to say. "Hey, Eric," she said when I picked up, her voice hesitant. "We need to talk." I clenched my jaw. Now she wanted to talk? After everything? After moving Brad into the house? Still, I didn't want to explode on the phone. "About what?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. I think we need to figure out what happens next. With the house, with everything." She paused, as if choosing her words carefully. "This doesn't have to get ugly, Eric." I almost laughed out loud. "It already is ugly, Amanda. You moved the guy you've been cheating with into our house, and now you want to have a calm conversation about it." There was a moment of silence on her end, then a sigh. "I didn't want it to be like this. I'm sorry, okay? But we need to move forward. Brad and we're going to stay in the house for now, so I guess we need to figure out how we split things up." I felt my grip tighten on the phone. She was talking about splitting things up like it was some casual arrangement. Like she hadn't just torn my life apart. "You're staying in the house? Our house? And where do you think I'm supposed to go?" Another pause. I could hear her breathing on the other end. "Eric, I'm not trying to hurt you. I know this is hard, but we can make it easier if we don't drag it out. Maybe you can stay with Matt for a while, just until things settle down." My blood boiled at her casual suggestion, but I bit my tongue. "You want me to leave the house so you and Brad can play house together? Eric, don't make this harder than it has to be. You'll get your share of the house, but right now we need to be practical. We'll figure it out." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It wasn't just the betrayal anymore, it was her complete disregard for me as a person. It was as if she had already rewritten me out of her life, and now I was just an obstacle in her new plans. "I've already filed for divorce," I said, my voice cold. "And trust me, I'm not leaving you with everything. I'm not just walking away." She didn't seem surprised. "I figured as much," she replied, almost flatly. "Look, I don't want to fight with you. I just want to get this over with as smoothly as possible." I let out a breath, feeling exhausted from the conversation. "You already made your choices, Amanda. I'm just making sure I don't get screwed over because of them." There was another long silence on the other end of the line, and then she finally spoke, her voice softer now. "I'm sorry, Eric. I really am." But I didn't believe her anymore. "Yeah," I muttered. "Me too." I hung up the phone, my heart heavy. I knew what needed to be done, but that didn't make it any easier. Amanda's apology felt empty, like she was just going through the motions of what she thought she should say. As I sat there, staring at the phone, I realized something. I wasn't going to get closure from her. I wasn't going to get the apology I deserved, or the regret I hoped for. The Amanda I had loved was gone, and I had to stop waiting for her to show up again. It was time to move on, for real this time. After that phone call, something shifted in me. I finally let go of the idea that Amanda would ever truly understand the pain she had caused. She had already made her choice, and I realized it was time for me to make mine. There was no point holding on to hope that she'd wake up one day and regret everything. That wasn't going to happen. The next few days were a blur of legal meetings and figuring out the logistics of splitting our lives apart. I threw myself into the process, determined to protect what I could. It was strange, dismantling a life we'd spent years building together. But it had to be done. Matt had been great through all of it, giving me space when I needed it and checking in when I didn't even realize I needed someone to talk to. It was comforting knowing I had someone in my corner, someone who wasn't going to betray me or let me down. I started looking for my own place, a fresh start away from the house that Amanda and Brad now shared. It hurt thinking about them living there, but I couldn't let that stop me from moving forward. I needed to reclaim some control over my life, to find a space that wasn't tainted by all the lies and betrayal. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of clarity. This chapter of my life was ending, and I had to accept that. There was no going back, no fixing what had been broken. But maybe, just maybe, there was a way to build something new, something better. After finalizing a few details with my lawyer, I realized it was time to start focusing on myself. The thought of Amanda and Brad playing house in what used to be our home still stung, but I knew I couldn't dwell on it forever. I had to make a clean break, even if it meant leaving behind more than just memories. A few days later, I went apartment hunting. It felt surreal, walking through empty spaces, imagining a life that didn't include Amanda. But as strange as it was also a bit liberating. I found a small place downtown, not too far from Matt's. It wasn't much, just a one-bedroom with enough room for me and a fresh start. Signing the lease felt like the first real step toward reclaiming my life. As I handed over the paperwork, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I wasn't tied to the past anymore, at least not physically. This new place, however small, was mine, free of the lies and the betrayal that had consumed my marriage. The next weekend, Matt helped me move in. There wasn't much to bring, just the essentials and a few personal items I hadn't been able to leave behind. We worked in silence for the most part, but every now and then, Matt would crack a joke, lightening the mood. By the end of the day, the apartment still looked bare, but it was mine. As I stood there, looking around at the boxes and the empty walls, I felt a strange sense of hope. It wasn't the life I had imagined, but it was a chance to start over, to rebuild. And, for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. Moving into the new apartment felt like closing the door on one part of my life, even though the emotional scars were still fresh. It wasn't just about leaving the house I'd shared with Amanda. It was about starting from scratch alone. For the first few nights, the silence of the apartment was deafening. No familiar sounds of Amanda coming home late, no shared meals at the dining table, just me and the echo of my own thoughts. The apartment was modest, but I liked it that way. It didn't need to be fancy or full of memories. It just needed to be mine. I spent the first few days unpacking, slowly turning the empty space into something that resembled a home. I bought a few pieces of furniture and hung up some art, but I was in no rush. The emptiness felt fitting, like a blank slate I could build on over time. Matt continued to be a constant presence. He'd stop by every other day, sometimes bringing beer or pizza, and we'd just hang out, talk, or watch a game. I was grateful for that. It helped distract me from the thoughts that still lingered about Amanda, about Brad, about how I'd let my life spiral so far out of control without realizing it. One evening, as we sat on my new couch, Matt turned to me and said, "You know, man, you're handling this better than I thought you would." I raised an eyebrow. Better? I feel like I'm barely holding it together. Matt shrugged. Maybe, but look where you are. You're not sitting around waiting for Amanda to come crawling back. You've moved on, at least physically. A lot of people in your shoes would still be stuck in that house, drowning in the past. I nodded, knowing there was some truth to what he said. Physically, I had moved on. Emotionally, though, that was a different story. I still thought about her, about how we went from being partners to strangers in what felt like the blink of an eye. I still felt the sting of betrayal, the bitterness that came from being lied to so deeply. But I was learning to live with it. I knew that I couldn't undo what had happened, and staying stuck in that hurt wouldn't change anything. The apartment wasn't just a new place to sleep, it was a symbol of the life I had to rebuild. It was my own, free from the weight of someone else's choices. As the days passed, I started settling into a routine. I went back to work, started going to the gym again, and even reconnected with a few old friends. Slowly, the pieces of my life were starting to come together again. It wasn't perfect, and there were still nights when the loneliness hit me hard. But for the first time since I found out about the affair, I could see a way forward. And I realized something. While I couldn't control what Amanda had done, I could control what I did next. My life was still mine, and I wasn't going to let her actions define it. As weeks turned into months, I began to feel a sense of balance return to my life. It was gradual, nothing happened overnight, but every small step forward felt like a victory. I filled my days with work, hit the gym more often, and slowly started rebuilding relationships that had fallen by the wayside while I was caught up in the mess with Amanda. It wasn't always easy. Some mornings I'd wake up and feel the weight of it all again, like a heavy stone pressing down on my chest. But those mornings were becoming fewer. I'd think about Amanda and Brad sometimes, usually when I drove past the old neighborhood or caught sight of something that reminded me of her. The bitterness still lingered, but I'd stop checking her social media or wondering how they were getting along in my house. It didn't matter anymore. I wasn't living in the shadow of their choices. I was finally living my own life. One afternoon, about 6 months after I'd moved out, Amanda called me out of the blue. I hadn't spoken to her in months, not since we'd hashed out the last details of the divorce, and seeing her name flash on my screen brought back memories I didn't care to revisit. I stared at the phone for a moment, debating whether I should even answer. But in the end, curiosity won. "Hello," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Hey, Eric," she said softly. I could hear the hesitation in her voice, like she wasn't sure what to say next. "I know it's been a while. I wanted to check in, see how you're doing." It was such a strange question coming from her, like we were old friends who had simply lost touch. But I wasn't angry, not anymore. I had moved past the stage where every thought of her felt like a fresh wound. "I'm doing fine," I replied, a bit guarded. "What about you?" There was a pause, and then she sighed. I'm okay. Things didn't exactly turn out how I thought they would." I wasn't sure what she meant by that, but I didn't press her. It didn't matter how things had turned out for her. Whatever regrets or second thoughts she had, they weren't mine to carry. I had learned the hard way that holding on to other people's mistakes only dragged you down. "I'm glad you're doing okay," she said finally. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Really, for everything." Her words were sincere, but they didn't hit me the way they would have months ago. Maybe there was a part of me, deep down, that had waited to hear that apology, but now that it was here, it felt like a distant echo. It didn't change anything. It didn't take away the pain or undo the damage. But it was closure in a way. "I appreciate that, Amanda," I said, and I meant it. "But we've both moved on. What's done is done." She hesitated again, and I could almost feel the weight of what she wanted to say next. Maybe she was hoping for some kind of reconciliation, or maybe she just wanted to ease her own guilt. But whatever she was looking for, I wasn't going to give her that. "You're right," she said softly. I guess I needed to say it out loud. "Take care, Eric." "You too," I replied before hanging up. As I put the phone down, I felt an unexpected sense of relief. It was like the final chapter had been written, and I could close the book on that part of my life. Amanda's apology wasn't going to erase what happened, but it wasn't my job to make her feel better about it either. I had found my own peace, and I wasn't about to let her pull me back into the past. That evening, I sat on the balcony of my new apartment, looking out over the city. It wasn't a perfect view, mostly just rooftops and distant traffic, but it was mine. My life wasn't where I thought it would be, but it was my own again. I was free to make my own choices, to live without the shadow of betrayal hanging over me. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I was excited about the future. I wasn't sure where I was headed, but I knew I was moving forward. I wasn't the same man I was before all of this happened. I was stronger, wiser, and more resilient than I'd ever given myself credit for. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I smiled to myself. The hurt would always be part of my story. But it wasn't the ending. It was just the beginning of something new. And that in itself was enough.